Picture this. It's Christmas night 1467, but there are no carols. There's only screaming. You're standing in the mud of Bayeux, watching the King of Hungary run for his life. Matthias Corvinus, the most powerful monarch in Central Europe, is crawling through the snow, bleeding from 3 arrow wounds in his back. The town around him is an incinerator. Streets are choked with the bodies of knights who never had time to put on their armor. And the man hunting him down isn't a pagan warlord. It's his own vassal. It's the man who set his own city on fire just to watch the king burn. History remembers Stephen the Great as a saintly defender of the faith. But survivors knew the truth. Stephen was a tactical genius who understood one thing. When you're a small fish in a tank of sharks, you don't play fair. You tear the tank apart. Matthias had come expecting surrender, not slaughter. He marched 40,000 mercenaries across the Carpathians to crush Stephen, an upstart prince who refused to kneel. The plan was standard. Burn villages, starve peasants, force the smaller army into open field where heavy cavalry acts like a meat grinder. Stephen refused to cooperate. He didn't give Matthias a battle. He gave him a wasteland. As Hungarians advanced, they found only empty granaries and poisoned wells. Stephen had evacuated the population and stripped the land bare. Hunger gnawed at Matthias's troops. By the time they reached Bayeux, cold was killing as many men as arrows from the tree lines. Matthias garrisoned his freezing army inside the town. Confident winter provided a shield. He assumed Stephen was retreating. He was wrong. Stephen was waiting. As darkness fell on December 14th, 12,000 Moldavians silently surrounded the town. They didn't bring siege engines. They brought torches. On Stephen's signal, the night exploded. They lit the wooden palisades from 3 directions, leaving the 4th open, not as escape but as a killing zone. Hungarian soldiers woke up choking on smoke. A knight on a horse is a tank in an open field. In a burning alley, he's just a man trapped in a metal oven. Stephen rode into the flames, hunting for Matthias. He wasn't trying to rout the army. He was trying to decapitate the state. His archers spotted the royal guard and unleashed a volley. Matthias took 3 hits. His bodyguards barely dragged him out, fleeing into mountains while comrades burned. The superpower of Eastern Europe had been broken in a single night. But as sun rose, Stephen didn't celebrate. He looked at commanders who had hesitated, allowing Matthias to escape. Stephen lined up 20 of his highest-ranking noblemen and executed them in front of the troops. 40 others were impaled on the spot. Matthias signed a peace treaty and never attacked Moldavia again. But Stephen had no time to rest. The Ottoman Empire had been watching. They saw a dangerous new player. To understand how Stephen became this man, go back 16 years to October 1451. Stephen was just a teenager, son of Prince Bogdan II. The setting was supposed to be joyful, a wedding feast in Ruzini. Wine was flowing, music playing. Guards had lowered their spears. In the Balkans, letting your guard down was a death sentence. As festivities peaked, doors burst open. Petru Aaron, Stephen's own uncle, stormed the hall with mercenaries. He didn't come for negotiation. He came for the crown. Before royal guards could draw swords, the hall turned into a slaughterhouse. Stephen watched as his father was cut down amidst overturned tables and spilled wine. Bogdan II was beheaded right there on the banquet floor. Young Stephen slipped away into the night. He didn't just lose a father. He lost his country, his inheritance, and his innocence. He became a fugitive, hunted by his uncle's men. Stephen fled south into Transylvania and then Wallachia. Here in cold wilderness, destiny played its most ironic card. Stephen found refuge with another noble orphan carrying a similar burden of trauma and rage. His name was Vlad Dracula. In those early years, they were blood brothers bound by shared nightmare. Both were sons of murdered fathers. Both had seen thrones stolen by usurpers. Both lived in shadow of Hungarian and Ottoman empires. They learned brutal survival. They analyzed why their fathers died. Bogdan trusted his family, he died for it. Vlad's father trusted the boyars, he was buried alive. The lesson was etched. Trust no one. Strike first. Mercy is a luxury of the safe, and they were never safe. Vlad was volatile force, fire and terror. Stephen was ice, calculating, observant, patient. While Vlad dreamed of impaling enemies to create landscapes of fear, Stephen understood fear alone wasn't enough. You needed structure. You needed a fortress that couldn't be breached from inside. By 1457, the waiting was over. Vlad had reclaimed Walachia's throne and become the Impaler. He gave Stephen 6,000 experienced soldiers and pointed him north. Stephen marched back as a warlord. He met his uncle on the battlefield and shattered the usurper's army. At 24, Stephen the Great was anointed Prince of Moldavia. But as the crown was placed on his head, Stephen looked at the Moldavian boyars, nobility who had bowed to his father, then his uncle, and now him. He saw the same men who watched his father die. He knew their loyalty was thin as morning mist. The boyars believed they could control this young prince. They were wrong. They'd crowned a man who had spent 6 years planning how to dismantle their power bone by bone. Stephen launched systematic purge with cold precision of a surgeon. He didn't just want to kill traitors. He wanted to restructure society itself. He seized estates of any boyar showing disloyalty. Executions were frequent but followed by redistribution. He took land from old families and gave it to a new class, the vitagi, the braves. These weren't highborn aristocrats. They were lesser nobles, free peasants, soldiers who distinguished themselves in battle. Stephen offered a simple deal. Fight for me, bleed for me, and I'll give you land, status, and voice. By creating the vitagi, he built a standing army answering only to him. When he called banners, 40,000 men answered, not because lords forced them, but because their prince gave them a stake. He began massive fortification, engineering the citadel of Suceava to withstand gunpowder artillery. Suceava became the physical embodiment of his reign, unyielding, grim, and permanent. By early 1460s, Stephen had pacified internal chaos. But just as he secured his house, the neighborhood began to burn. South in Wallachia, cousin Vlad was picking a fight he couldn't win. Vlad stopped paying tribute to the Ottoman Sultan and began his campaign of terror. The Ottoman response was inevitable and massive. Stephen watched with calculating eye. Honor dictated he should stand shoulder to shoulder with his cousin. But Stephen wasn't a knight in a romance novel. He was a practitioner of realpolitik. In June 1462, while Vlad launched his night attack on the Sultan, Stephen did something unthinkable. He marched to Chilia fortress, not to help Vlad, but to take it from him. Chilia was the economic lung of the region. Whoever controlled Chilia controlled trade routes between Black Sea and Central Europe. Stephen knew if Moldavia was to survive, he needed that lung. During siege, Stephen was shot in the ankle, a wound that would never heal and plague him the rest of his life. But he seized Chilia. From sentimental perspective, it was betrayal. From strategic perspective, it was a masterstroke. Shortly after, Vlad fled to Hungary and was imprisoned. Wallachia became essentially an Ottoman province. Stephen stood alone. The Bull of Moldavia was now the last independent power. He had his fortress, his trade route, his army. But he'd lost his buffer zone. The path to Moldavia was wide open. By 1474, Mem-Too's patience ran out. The Sultan was the conqueror who smashed Constantinople's walls. Stephen had stopped paying tribute. It wasn't about money. It was about submission. The Sultan sent General Suleiman Pasha with 120,000 men. Against this, Stephen could muster 40,000, mostly free peasants with spears, axes, and bows. On paper, suicide. But Stephen knew something Suleiman ignored: the calendar. Ottomans invaded in late 1474. Winter was closing in. Stephen decided to weaponize the landscape itself. He issued a command: leave nothing for the enemy. As Ottomans lumbered north, they found a ghost world.
Village abandon.
Granaries empty. Wells poisoned. Stephen used hit-and-run tactics, targeting supply wagons, picking off stragglers. Suleiman pressed on, driven by arrogance. He marched his starving, freezing army deeper into the trap. Stephen had chosen the battlefield, a narrow, marshy valley near Vaslui. On January 10th, 1475, Sunday didn't rise over the valley. Fog was so thick men couldn't see their own spears. Suleiman ordered troops forward into the narrow valley. He thought he was marching into a battlefield. Reality, a killbox. Winter thaw had turned marshland into freezing mud. As Ottoman heavy cavalry charged, horses didn't gallop, they sank. The Sultan's pride was immobilized. Stephen's artillery fired from surrounding hills. Cannonballs tore through packed ranks. But real genius came from the forest. Stephen had ordered musicians to hide in woods. At his signal, thousands of bugles blasted. Drums thundered. To Ottoman commanders, disoriented by fog, it sounded like a massive army was attacking their flank. Suleiman panicked. He ordered troops to turn and face the invisible threat. But there was no army, only a phantom. As Ottoman lines twisted in confusion, Stephen unleashed the real blow. His infantry charged with long axes and scythes, weapons designed to pull knights off horses and hack through armor. Massacre. By the time fog lifted, 40,000 Ottoman soldiers lay dead. Greatest defeat the Ottoman Empire ever suffered at Christian hands. Stephen rode through carnage but didn't gloat. He knew he'd won a battle, not the war. He sent a letter to the Pope. I have cut off the right hand of the pagans, but the other hand is coming. Summer 1476, Mem II took personal command. He marched north with a massive army and coordinated with Crimean Tatars attacking from east. Strategic checkmate. Stephen's peasant army begged to go home to save families from Tatars. Stephen let them go. He was left with barely 10,000 soldiers to face the Ottoman Empire's full wrath. He chose his ground at Razboyini, plateau surrounded by forests. As Ottomans approached, Stephen set the woods on fire. For hours, the small Moldavian force held the line, fighting like demons in burning undergrowth. But sheer weight of numbers was undeniable. Stephen's army was annihilated. The battlefield was later named Valia Alba, the White Valley, because for years, ground was carpeted with sun-bleached bones. Stephen escaped, but he was broken. Army gone. Country overrun. This is where most kings surrender or flee. The story goes that wounded and exhausted, Stephen rode to the citadel where his mother stayed. He knocked, desperate for refuge. The gate didn't open. His mother appeared on ramparts. She looked down at her defeated son and refused to let him in. I am the mother of a winner, not a coward, she cried. Go back, gather what men you can, die for your country, or come back victorious. But do not hide here. Stephen didn't break. He turned his horse around. He gathered survivors and became a ghost. Meanwhile, Mehmed found conquering land different from conquering people. He marched to Suceava expecting surrender. It fired cannons at him. His army began to die. Scorched earth tactics worked again. Plague broke out. In August 1476, with supply lines stretched and men dying of dysentery, the Sultan ordered retreat. He'd burned villages but hadn't broken the prince. By 1490s, Stephen was an old man. 40 years in the saddle. Gray hair. The ankle wound festering. He'd earned rest. Instead, he got invasion from his allies. In 1497, King John Albert of Poland declared a crusade against Ottomans. But the Polish army didn't march toward Turks. They marched straight for Suceava. John Albert wanted to depose Stephen. He laid siege for 3 weeks. But Stephen had turned that citadel into an impenetrable nut. John Albert negotiated a truce to retreat. Stephen agreed on one condition: return the way you came. John Albert agreed. Then he broke his word. He marched into the Kosman forest. Stephen was waiting. He'd ordered men to cut massive beech trees almost through, hiding cuts with moss. As Poles passed, Moldavians pushed trees over. Timber crashed down. Horses crushed. Knights pinned. Then peasants attacked. It wasn't battle, it was riot. Stephen captured thousands, including high-ranking nobles. He didn't ransom or execute them. He put them to work. Stephen forced proud Polish knights to break their swords into plowshares. He yoked noblemen to plows like oxen and forced them to till fields they tried to conquer. He made them plant acorns. The beech forests of Bukowina standing today grew from acorns planted by weeping Polish nobility. On July 2, 1504, bells of Putna Monastery tolled. The Iron Prince was dead. But before his last breath, Stephen left his son instruction that stunned the court. He advised him to make peace with the Sultan, to accept Ottoman suzerainty. To casual observers, this looks like failure. But look closer. This was Stephen's final masterstroke. He realized Moldavia was too small to fight the Ottoman Empire forever. The goal was never to destroy the empire. The goal was to survive it. Because of terror he'd inflicted at Vaslui, Valia Alba, and countless skirmishes, sultans respected him, feared him. So when Moldavia finally submitted, it didn't do so as conquered province. It remained sovereign principality, kept its own laws, army, church, and princes. Stephen bought his country's autonomy with the blood of his enemies. He ensured that while the map might be painted Ottoman green, the heart remained Moldavian red. This unique status is why Romania exists today as a Latin island in a Slavic sea, and why its culture was never erased during centuries of domination. Why does the world remember Vlad Dracula and not Stephen the Great? The answer lies in the nature of fame. Vlad is a global icon because he's a monster. He fits perfectly into nightmares. He's a great story because he's simple. Fear, blood, stakes. Stephen is harder to classify. He isn't a monster. He's a monarch. He burned towns, executed traitors, betrayed his cousin. But he also built churches, protected peasants, negotiated treaties. He was a complex, contradictory human being who shouldered the weight of an entire civilization. Vlad fought for revenge. Stephen fought for tomorrow. Today, if you visit Putna Monastery, you can stand before his tomb. White marble, simple and elegant. No spices, no grim legends. Just an inscription. For the most glorious prince. The Ottoman Empire has fallen. Poland is gone. Hungary was partitioned. But Moldavia, the core of modern Romania, survived. It survived because one man 500 years ago was willing to be the surgeon. He was willing to cut, burn, and fight to keep the patient alive. Stephen the Great didn't just hold the line. He drew it, and he drew it in iron so deep that not even 5 centuries of wind and war could wash it away. So next time you hear the name Dracula, remember the cousin who stood in the shadows. Remember the man who didn't just want to scare the darkness, but who built the light to hold it back.